picture of Mr. Murakami, the last survivor of the breakout, who I was fortunate to meet during the 75th anniversary, and but sadly has died since then. But I wanted to end on a really sad irony of the breakout, which is that the men who died in the Cowra breakout, the Japanese who died, are the ones who never relieved themselves of the shame that they felt, because their families then received information that these men had died whilst prisoners, and many families refused to believe it and said, my son never would have been taken prisoner. So the men who died were the ones who never escaped the shame of being captured. The men who survived, conversely, somewhat ironically, were able to go back to Japan and live long, happy lives, and to put their service and their captivity in some sort of context for their families, and also to look back decades later in that very different perspective we now have about the Second World War. And so the men who survived the breakout were the ones that were most able to tell the stories, and sadly the men who died were the ones who were burdened with that shame, even in death. So thank you for listening to the story of the Cowra breakout, the battle on Australian soil. If you have any questions or want to know anything more, please do message me at matt@battlefields.com.au. But enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you for listening to this presentation.
So you've got his email just briefly there. If you do have some other questions, follow up by all means, or grab the book. He's a little bit over time, so I'll plough forward. John Gribben is here, and he's going to speak to us in person, and he's going to talk to us about POWs and internment camps. And you heard a little bit about POWs then who got a liking for Australia and came back, and also the area that I'm always fascinated by is internment camps, and the fact that we, as a government, the Australian people decided to put these people in camps against their will for whatever rationale and reason. How we got away with it at the time, it just astounds me. But I would ask you to think about how we might deal with the subject of internment in the current multicultural society that is Australia today. I don't know if it's even something that we'd even consider. So I look forward to hearing from Jim on those two topics as they apply to Victoria. Sorry, John.
Thanks, Marcus. I might need Jason to help press the buttons on me for a minute. Thanks for inviting us down. It's unfortunate, but not a lot of people realise what we have in country Victoria, and I can tell you there is an amazing array of things to see. But do we want to start? Jason, you want to click on the first one? Okay, Gustav Ponath. Gustav Ponath is leader of the 8th Machine Gun Regiment at Tobruk. He's a World War I veteran. He's between World War I and World War II. He's teaching at various military colleges across Germany about strategies of war. And he's in Tobruk, and they say to him, Ponath, grab 100 men, go out in the desert out there and capture that country. And he says, I'm not going. He said, no, you don't understand. Strategically, we need that land out there. So you grab 100 men, go out there and capture that country. He says, I'm not going. He says, what do you mean not going? He goes, I'm not going because you're trying to send me forward without any reconnaissance and without any heavy artillery backup. That would be a suicide mission for my men. I'm not going to force them to do it. Well, we need to do this. This argument goes on for half a day until the higher-ups, potentially Rommel, I'm not sure, but eventually they say, Ponath, get your 100 men and get out there. Ponath grabs his 100 men. He gets out into the desert, and it's not long before they encounter an Australian patrol. There's a firefight. Ponath is shot through the neck and dies almost immediately. And as he dies, all his men surrender. But so revered was Ponath for standing up for his men that they wrapped his body up in a German flag and carried it off the battlefield. And when they got put into jail, they built a stone memorial for him because he stood up for them. Like, that's a very unusual thing for a German officer to do, and that's a really fantastic thing. Now, that blood-stained German flag now hangs in Canberra's War Memorial. But you're probably asking, well, why am I talking about this? And the reason I'm talking about this is because in a little paddock out in Murchison, there is a stone memorial to Ponath for where all these men ended up. And if you give us, and this is how it looks if you look on the right-hand side, that's how it looks today. In fact, it's a bit strange that the long, tall monument with a cross through it, believe it or not, is an Italian naval memorial, but the Ponath Memorial is the smaller one at the back. Let's go on one more. This is all because during World War II, there were 7 prisoner of war camps in the Gribben Valley, housing about 10,000 prisoners of war and internees. Now, to give you an idea, I'm trying to give you a bit of an idea. We're in central Victoria. You'll see Shepparton at the top right-hand side, Nagambie down lower. That might be familiar to you, but Waranga Basin. The reason they're all in the Gribben Valley is because we have irrigation, so we've got access to water all year round. And the climate isn't too bad. First of all, you'll see Camp 1. Camp 1 is the first purpose-built prisoner of war camp in Australia during World War II. It was known as the Nazi camp because if you were in the Australian Nazi Party before World War II, and there was an Australian Nazi Party, particularly around the Barossa Valley and a few of those places, more than likely you would have ended up here. So it was a civilian camp, but that's where the Nazis were. Camp 2 is an interesting one because Camp 2 was full of German Jews. Now, everyone hears about the Dunera, what happened with the Dunera. It was a bit of a hell ship. They ended up out at Hay. And when the Australians saw these prisoners, they said, oh, hang on, something's not right here. So they ended up doing an inquiry. And in that inquiry, they found that the Jews had been bullied. I understand the British crew of the Dunera, or some of the British crew, was court-martialed. But at the time of the inquiry, it was like 42 degrees, and they're going through dust storms and whatever. They said, look, just shut it down, move them south. So they moved them all down to Camp 2 here. It's actually, I'll just digress a bit, because I'm hearing some great stories. I feel like a bit out of fish out of water here, but at Camp 2, I'll tell you a story. I'm speaking to one of the Jewish prisoners there at one stage, and I said to him, what was the food like there? And he goes, look, to be honest, the food we had then is better than I have now. And I said, no. Oh no, he says, you don't understand. He said, initially I was at Camp 2, and my first job was cutting firewood. I said, go there. And then he says, I got a promotion to, I said, what was your promotion? He goes, I become a potato peeler. I said, how is that a promotion? And he said, well, whether you're cutting firewood, it's hard work, and you've got to get up early, and the ovens have got to be, hot by 7 o'clock for the cooks. But he says, when you're a potato peeler, you sit down with mates, it's all easy. But he says, I eventually rose to the position of the kitchen superintendent. So knowing that the prisoners had to do everything inside the camps, he said, the kitchen superintendent works out who's cutting the firewood, who's peeling the potatoes, who's cooking, who's serving the meals, who's washing up, who's drying up, who's sweeping the floor, who's picking up the trestle tables and packing them away. They had jobs for everyone. But he said, at one stage, there was a problem about the food. I said, how's that? He goes, well, we got called into the commander's office, and there was an Australian garrison member there, and the commander said, right, well, you go first. And the Australian garrison member said, look, it's not right that the prisoners here are getting all this great food. He says, the good food shouldn't be all given to the prisoners. It should be shared equally amongst the garrison and the prisoners. They should get all of it. He said, some of the stuff we have is really inedible. And he said, they get these fantastic meals, it's just not right. And they said, the commander turned to this guy, his chap's name Bern Brent, and they said, well, what do you got to say for yourself? And he said, look, before I start, can I introduce you to Jaime here, who's the head chef of the London Dorchester. And then I want you to meet Fritz over here, who's the head chef of the Berlin Adeline. Like, they had got the same food, but they had some of the best chefs in Europe at this place as well. So, unfortunately, I can imagine the Australians living off sort of boiled mutton every day, which wouldn't have been all that good. But that was Camp 2. Camp 3, interestingly enough, was full of German and Italian families. Of those, mainly the ones captured in places like Palestine. So as the Australian troops come through the Middle East, we encounter these Italians and Germans, and I said, well, hang on, we've got nowhere to house these people, they'd be sympathetic. So they put them into Camp 3. Camp 4 was an interesting one. Camp 4 was full of Japanese families. So if you were, a lot of them were, anywhere from Fiji to New Zealand, any Japanese expat who was in all these places all got round up and put into Camp 4. Interestingly enough, there was even a half-caste Aboriginal girl who was in Camp 4 because her father was a Japanese pearl diver from up near Darwin. So it's sort of interesting. They had compounds, but they're all sort of, if you looked Asian, I think you got put into the camp. Interestingly enough though, we're just talking about how things are bad in all the camps. At one stage, the leader of Camp 4 was a chap by the name of Scurry, Major Scurry, who had actually fought in the World War I, and he helped invent the pop-off gun that went off on the peninsula when they all escaped off the peninsula. Anyhow, he got an award for that, but it was a really well-liked person, and he got put in charge of Camp 4. Now, they did a lot of good things. He was an interesting chap. At one stage, the army had brought in auditors to check on visitors. So visitors would come in once a month, and you could have an hour's visit with these people. But, the auditors come and say, like, the hour's up, off you go. And then, oh, the hour's up, off you go. So we just ignore me. Whoops, sorry. An hour's up, off you go. So in the end, when Scurry found out about this, and he told the auditors, well, you guys can bugger off. He says, what do you mean? We're only just doing what we're No. He says, a lot of these people have travelled a long way to see these prisoners. And he said, if we can go longer than an hour, we will. So your hour, I don't want that. And also, at one stage, they were going to bring up screens and have the visitors behind a screen. And he said, no, we're not going to treat these people as people. Anyhow, the prisoners really appreciated it. And at one stage, the prisoners were, the commander was leaving because they used to rotate them in and rotate them out. He used to rotate them and rotate them out. And he was leaving, and the chap below Scurry, a guy by the name of Sullivan, Major Sullivan, he said, well, hey, let's have a dinner for him, because he's a really good bloke, this bloke. He said, right. So they organised this dinner. 2 days out before the dinner, they said, well, we better go and see him, because he could nip off to the pub or something, in the meantime. So they said, look, we know you're leaving in 2 days' time, but the guys really like you, the garrison's really thought highly of you, and we want to have a dinner for you. And look, we've got it all organised. We've got guards coming in from other camps to man the guard towers for a few hours, all taken care of. Anyhow, Scurry said, oh, thank you very much. But the next day, Scurry called Sullivan in and he said, look, I've been thinking about this. The dinner's all very nice and everything, but I feel real bad putting out all these other guards that come in from the other camps. Yeah, so he goes, so I've gone and cancelled them all. I said, oh, gee. He said, but don't worry. He said, I've gone and spoke to the Japanese camp leaders, and I said, look, tomorrow night, there's not going to be anyone in the guard towers for a few hours. No one's going to escape, are you? And they said they wouldn't. And he said, and that's good enough for me. And that's exactly what they did. So let them all know that there's not going to be in the guard towers. And there's sort of stories after the war. A lot of them didn't want to go back. In fact, Sullivan had organised that dinner. He actually kept in contact with many of the prisoners. Though some of those prisoners even came back to Australia for a reunion in 1993, I think it was. But they really thought highly of the Australians, and it was sort of good. So it was a bit of a different story to the other Japanese camps. You also look here, Camp 5 is not mentioned here, but Camp 5 is actually an Italian officers' camp at Warrowley, just near Wangaratta, which I haven't included here. Camp 6 is an interesting one at Greytown. Camp 6 was a small camp. So all these other camps are about 1,000 or so, 1, 2, 3 and 4, about 1,000 or 1,500 people. Camp 6 is a very small one of 250, basically woodcutters. So they would supply firewood for all the other camps as well as the hospitals in Melbourne. So that's what they would do. Originally it was Italian soldiers, but then after 43 the Germans went in there. Some of the Germans from the raider ship, the Cormoran, were actually there as well. Now you'll look at Camp 13, which was in Victoria. Victoria's probably largest high security camp during World War II, 4,000 enemy combatants. So we had German, Italian and Japanese soldiers in that camp. And you'll see D, the Durandal Mansion, that was actually a small camp of about 250 German officers. So that's what that was there. Okay, what have we got, Chase? Around in central Victoria, because we had such a large concentration of prisoners of war and internees, we have two significant foreign war cemeteries in the Golden Valley. The one on the left-hand side is the German War Cemetery, and I should point out it's in two parts. It's got a World War I section and a World War II section. Interestingly, in the World War I section, they were all mainly from around Sydney, that we didn't have camps in the Golden Valley in World War I. But after the Second World War, they dug up all the graves from all the civilian cemeteries and turned them all into these final resting places. For the Germans, let's say it's here at Tatura, and there's over 200 people in the World War I section of the German War Cemetery. What's really interesting is that they have names and date of death. Over half of the 200 World War I victims there all died in the year 1919, which is after the war had ended, but they all had the Spanish flu, so that's why they ended up there. In the World War II section, there's about 50 or so people there. Interestingly enough, in the front row there's a chap by the name of Obergefreiter Tobias Stötzendhauser, who happens to be the only German shot and killed on Australian soil, and he was shot and killed just out at Murchison there, along with about 8 others. Long story, I won't go into it, but it was that was the story there. On your right-hand side, you'll see over there, that is the Italian Osario at Murchison. The Italian Osario is interesting because it gathered the bodies of Italians who had died during the period of the war. There's 130 bodies in there. Interestingly enough, there is only one woman, a girl, Amina Sentones, who was, she was a large lady captured in Palestine. I think she had pleurisy or breathing problems. She passed away there. What's interesting though, while there are civilians at this Osario, which is a place of bones, most of the people there, by surely 80% of them all, are soldiers. But what's interesting is that 10% of these soldiers drowned, and they drowned in really shallow waters like of the Goulburn River or the Waranga Basin, because we had the issues of fascists and non-fascists. You know, if Marcus was a non-fascist and I was a fascist, I might teach Marcus to swim underwater for a while, and I'd be really good at it too, Marcus. So that's what I think happened. There's at least 11 murders at Camp 13 we talked about, just on Italians. So, yeah. Okay, next one. Okay, we just talked a little bit about things. I'll just sort of raise this one up. Just out of Murchison on the Murchison Town Road, if you just drive up past this section here and look south, you see the gate and the trees on the side. If you flick it, another one. Interestingly enough, there was an airfield there. So from about 1941 to 54, this was the regional airfield for the Goulburn Valley, in part because of its proximity to all these prisoner of war camps, but also because it's really halfway between Mangalore, near Seymour, and Tokemore. So it's sort of a halfway go-between point. And the planes that were landing were DC-3s. It was never had much hangar space or anything there, but it was significant enough there that they did land there. Now, We're at the Murchison Cemetery. This is what a picture of the Murchison Cemetery looks like today. But during the war, this is the scene you would have seen. And this is, you'll see, I'll just point out, that's the grave of Obergefreiter Tobias Stötzendauser, the only German shot and killed on Strasel. Just quickly, what had happened? As they were coming in from the Middle East, a lot of them had with them army-issued blankets and shirts and things, which they said, right, you got a choice here, boys, what's that? He goes, well, you either hand them all in, or you dye everything burgundy. I said, no, not doing that. And I said, yeah, you will, because if you don't hand it all in, we know that you'll make an overcoat or something that'll help you escape. And so you can't have that contraband. This standoff went on for about 2 weeks until they, eventually they got called into the parade ground. The garrison started coming in, going through the huts. And with that, one of the camp leaders said, stop, we want prisoners going with them because they're going to steal things. I said, no, mate, we're in charge here. And with that, someone in German shouted, dismissed. And with that, all the prisoners started running back to their huts. The guards fired a warning shot over the top, and so it went a bit faster. And then they lowered the gun just down, discharged 91 rounds of bullets into him, hit 8, but only killed 1, Obergefreiter Tobias Stötzendauser. And this is his funeral. Interestingly enough, we talked about different things. The guy, this highest ranking guy there, that's Captain Theodore Detmers, who is in charge of the German raider ship, the Cormorant, that sunk the Sydney off the West Australian coast. This other guy, most of them are in Africa Corps uniforms, but there's another guy, that guy there, he was on the Cormorant, he was in charge of the torpedo chutes. Interestingly enough, when they had the battle with the Sydney, they only had 1 torpedo left. And sure enough, it hit the Sydney, and the Sydney went down, not to be found for about 50 or 60 years. Okay, thanks, Jace. This is Camp 13. This is where they all were. Now, you'll see it's a very similar camp to the one in Cowra. Interestingly enough, when they said that the Vickers was ranged in on the camp. Now this one is exactly right. What the author said in the previous talk was right. They ended up building another Vickers gun here facing up. Apparently I didn't know, but the Vickers only has a range of about 30 degrees. So really, and if it's dark, all he has to do is just keep a wall of bullets going up and down, and they've got to go through with enfilade firing. So that's the story. So this is looking for one of the guard towers. Interestingly enough, you'll see the whole of the camp, they're all in tents at this stage. And what's interestingly enough, the officers are in tents as well. So they weren't giving any special treatment. In fact, I was talking to some nurses, some admin women who were there, and she said, oh yeah, I said, what did you get as your thing? Oh, we were given a palliasse, a greatcoat, and a blanket. But she said, that's what the garrison got. That's the same as the prisoners got, exactly the same. He said, but we'd make sure we'd bring home, we'd bring along extra blankets and a pillow from home. But basically the garrison got exactly what the prisoners got. I found that quite interesting. Okay. Inside the compound, not far from where I pointed out where the, actually can we go back one? Backspace. Yeah, backspace. But just here, you see the mulling around place? Okay, go forward again, thanks, Joe. That's that memorial. And it says in German, our fallen comrades. And on the 19th of November each year, the Germans, and many of them from the German raider ship, the Cormorant, would have a wreath-laying memorial here. And they would do that. It was very impressive. They'd be doing the goose step, it would be all the whole thing all in unison. Okay, one more. Forward. Cool. Not going forward. Yeah. And so they'll come in there, they would lay a wreath the 19th of November to remember the fallen sailors on the cormorant. One more. Okay, we saw this picture just a bit earlier. Now, what happened in that same compound, when the Germans broke out of Cowra, they ended up bringing 185 of them, so half of them. So obviously half went to Hay and half went down to this Camp 13 here. Interestingly enough, my father, who was with the VDC at the time, said, I remember them coming through Shepparton on the truck stop. I said, oh yeah. He goes, I think the Australians might have given them a flogging. I said, why do you say that? He goes, oh. He says, they all had black eyes and broken noses and broken arms. And I didn't really think much of it, but the previous authors that are maintained it here, when they rounded them up, they were told not to have any guns or anything. So I'm thinking, oh man, they would have taken with, you know, tyre levers and axe handles. So they probably would have beaten them to within an inch of their lives before they rounded them up. Okay, next one. Now, this stage, the Germans are moved to the compound next door. They can see this memorial coming up to the 19th. So they go to an Australian officer, a guy by the name of John Burr, and said, look, can you put a wreath on this memorial on the 19th? Because, look, we can all see it from our compound. But, if you just lay a wreath on it on the 19th for us, that'd be much appreciated. So this John Burr goes to the commander and he says, yeah, yes, you can do that. But if you go in unarmed and alone. He says, what do you mean? These guys are crazy. And I should point out that at one stage, a garrison member followed an army truck bringing supplies into this compound, and a Japanese soldier took him with a baseball bat and smashed his shoulder. So from that time on, in this particular quadrant, soldiers would go in twos. One would carry a gun and the other would carry a pick handle. So that's how they always went into this compound. But the commander's telling them, look, if you go in, we're going to do it exactly as we do the, we can't have them getting a gun off you and using it against you. He said, right out. He thinks about it, eventually goes in. He says, I'm got my head down, I'm going to greet you. So on the day, he walks in with his wreath, he says, got my head down, I don't want to draw attention to myself, but I can hear footsteps. Whoa. So he gets closer. He can hear footsteps. Eventually comes forward, he lays the wreath down, gets back up, takes a few steps back, stands to attention, salutes, heads down, starts walking away. And he says, as I get about 50 feet away, he says, I look around and I can see a wall of about 1,000 Germans on the hill, on the quadrant next door, all standing to attention and saluting that memorial. But he said, then I turned around a little bit further and the Japanese soldiers were also standing around that particular memorial, standing to attention and saluting. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. You've got an Australian soldier risking his life to put a wreath on a German naval memorial in the middle of Victoria, which is surrounded by hardened Japanese soldiers. Sometimes fact is a little bit stranger than fiction. Thank you. That's my talk.
Thanks, John. That was tremendous. Time for a couple of questions.
Yeah, John, I noticed you mentioned about the blankets and uniforms all being taken off and dyed, but I noticed in one of the photos of the Germans laying that wreath, they still had their German helmets.
I find that very strange too, but they must have been allowed some for ceremonial purposes only, I would have thought.
They could order them through the Red Cross.
Uh-huh.
Our blokes could do the same. They could order slouch hats through the Red Cross.
Wow. Yes.
There were breakouts in Europe, of course. Starlight Group 3, Sargon, mainly air crew. We know about the executions afterwards. They tunnelled. It did, in fact, my uncle supervised it, but one of my uncles, I should say. But in Australia, is there any tradition of tunnelling by these people?
The Germans actually, early part of the war, actually were in one of the compounds, had dug a tunnel between two compounds to connect two up, as well as a 60-metre tunnel from inside a compound to the outside, 6 foot high, duck boards and lights. And their anticipation, they were going to get 2,000 people out causing mayhem in the country. But the day before they were supposed to go, a couple of blokes couldn't wait, and they went out early, and all of a sudden they said, well, hang on, where's this? They did they busted, they did a roll call, search, and that's when they found the tunnels.
Sorry, where was that?
At Murchison, at this camp there.
It's interesting because that soil is ready-made for tunnelling.
This quadrant's really interesting. They tunnelled on this quadrant you could tunnel from, and they moved the Germans around to where this memorial was, which is really stony. So it would have been really hard to dig that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, there was also a tunnel at Durringale.
Yes, there was about 16 escaped from there. They're on the run for, and Detmers himself was one of them. He was on the run for about 2 weeks, but all captured, thankfully.
We're going to have to hold it there. Thank you, John.
Good idea, thank you.
All right, ladies and gents, we've got about 20 minutes now for some afternoon tea, which is not even there, so I'm not sure what's going on there. Producing, figure that. The good news is that afternoon tea is on the way, and the really good news is that while we're waiting for afternoon tea, we've got the special sales session on the book table. All right, have a great
It's hot over here now.